My name's Chris. This is St William's Works. Today I'm solving the problem of the missing links. Now, if you're a UK modeller of narrow gauge, and especially if you're a 16mm modeller, then you probably have some of these. And to couple them together, I have a little T piece that you can put in there. You can put in a bigger brass hook like a lot of people use for 16mm couplings with a 2 or 3 chain links, but I think that looks a little bit out of proportion on these small wagons. So what I use is something, just 3 little links of chain made up just big enough to slip over and long enough to give the wagons clearance to get around the corners and not to wobble around all over the place too much. The trouble is, these nice delicate little links are also nice and easy to lose in your bag and nice and easy for the hoover to find. So what I seem to end up with every few months is something more like this, which is a not quite so nice collection of bits of wire bent to shape quickly, probably at a venue in somebody's garden. So I thought it's time to go through the tipper wagons and make up a new set of chains, and I thought it might be worth sharing because it's a simple enough process, but everything's simple once you've done it once. It's the first time that's always the difficult one. I have one of my original 3-link chains here. So let's measure it and see how big those links really are. I know that these slip over the coupling pins nice and easily. So crosswise about 3.82, 383. Let's pull that longwise, about 7.2 I would say. So we need a former to bend links the same size. I have a couple of drills here which are 3.6mm, so I'm going to pop those into the vise side by side, tight together, and that will give us a former to bend some new links. Now we need some material to make our chain from. A soft malleable piece of steel, readily bent, easily soldered, and preferably costing next to nothing, or a paper clip as we sometimes call them. And I have a selection here, and all that needs doing with these to start with is to bend the little fellas back into a straight bit of wire before we bend them into the shape that we really want. So we've got a pair of long nose pliers here. That's all we're doing is squeezing and pushing to get them as straight as possible. They often have a little bend up here, which we're going to flatten out. So that's one. I shall carry on and do a few more before we start forming them into links. So here are the 2 drill bits, nipped up in the vise, tight up to each other side by side. And here's my paper clip. Let's start making links. It's not exactly an arduous process. Show you what that looks like when it's taken off. Here are our links from the former. Now they need separating. For our purposes with this, a pair of snips works quite well. And The most important thing I would say is, if you're doing this, do wear eye protection, because these little fellas can spring off all over the place. Last operation before soldering. Now, you may or may not be able to see that, but obviously these were wound up in a spiral, so we need to line the ends up a little bit. So grab it in the little pliers, lift that one a bit, grab the other one and push it down a bit. So if you can see, they should line up a bit better, and it's very difficult to get these totally into a round shape, but a little squeeze in there I'm ready to start soldering. I've divided the links into two piles. One has twice as many in as the other. I will solder this larger pile individually, each link, and then I'll slip those two at a time onto the third link to make the complete chain for each coupling, and solder that one after the other two are done. It's the easiest way. Now, for the purposes of soldering, I have a small chisel-tipped soldering iron. This is a 25-watt one. The flux I'm using is this Fluxite. This is the solder I'm using, quite a fine. I've no idea what the composition of this is, or even where I got it from. Again, I've probably had it quite a long time. Now, because I only have a couple of hands at the last count, I'm going to bend the solder up like that, so I can bring the link to the solder. We'll get the first link in the pliers on the opposite side to the hole, and with the traditional flux applying tool, put a bit of goop on there. I don't really want to be touching the iron to the solder necessarily. I want to be heating the metal to the melting point of the solder, and then touching the metal to the solder so that the solder melts, and definitely the metal is hot enough for it to form a good bond with. Now I have another 22 of those to do, so I'll carry on and do the individual ones, and then we'll come back when I've got them ready to pop together. Now then, we have 2/3 of the links soldered, 1/3 not. So the next trick is to, having flattened these out, unflatten them a touch. A bit like that. And drop a couple of links over. There we go. Now we want those other ones well out of the way. Touch of flux on the third one. And that's it. And the next one, please. I have 4 of the new coupling chains here. I put them in a shallow plastic dish. You can see at the moment they still look quite bright and shiny. And really, for an industrial narrow gauge sort of look, they want to be pretty mucky. I have a big pot of citric acid that I use for cleaning stuff up, and I'm going to drop some of this onto these. Got a little syringe here that I'm using. Doesn't really matter how much in it, to be quite honest. it doesn't matter how strong, although I generally try and make it as strong as now-tells will dissolve. So we've got citric acid in there, and this is citric acid that's been used before for pickling parts after soldering them, so it's probably got a certain amount of copper residue in. Now if I spread these out a bit in sight of the camera again, and what we're also going to do is drop in a couple of bits of copper tube. Now I don't know if you use citric acid in the workshop for cleaning stuff up, but most often if you put a bit of steel in where there's been copper and brass in it before, there'll be a bit of copper in solution, and it copper plates the steel. So I've got copper plated pliers and tweezers and things, and it's a darn nuisance. However, in this case, at the very least, a bit of copper plating will take the shine off these, and I'm rather hoping it will go one better than that. Now what I'm going to do is leave this soaking with the camera on it for a while, and then we'll come back in a few minutes and see what's happened. See you in a little while. After a couple of hours, you can see that the couplings have, I wouldn't say blackened, but they've certainly darkened a great deal, which gives them quite a satisfactory appearance. So I'm going to wash these off with a little water, and then we'll see what they look like on the wagons. Let's see the new coupling chains in action.